Welcome to the Words That Change Lives podcast, helping leaders, coaches, and small business owners to 10 times the impact of their message. Join us as we delve into the art of powerful language, enabling you to speak with unwavering honesty, communicate authentically, and create a lasting impression with every word. My guest today is someone who has a wealth of experience, not only in terms of the career that she's had working within investment management, within wealth, but also where she's had that experience. She's worked within a number of different countries, working within diverse teams and communicating across those teams, and is a fantastic mentor to other women and leaders in business to help them to build resilience, to overcome conflict, to network effectively. And it's been an honor to have her as my client. And today we're talking about those nuances in communication when we as humans need to understand each other in a little bit more of a detailed way. We need to understand that maybe due to the environment someone grew up in, their religious beliefs, their cultural norms, that they might think a bit differently to us. And so therefore they might communicate differently, they might work differently, and they may have different expectations to work within. And this is especially relevant if you are an organization that is global in the respect that you have offices in different countries, there are different cultures within those countries, that you have frequent communication across different units, countries and cultures, and that you want to navigate that in the best way possible. You might be a company that is introducing an office in a new country and a different country to the UK, for example, and you want to do it the right way. Well, this conversation is going to help because Zoe has had direct experience of doing that. She began her long career in finance as one of the first women to work in the London Stock Exchange in the 1980s. She's based in Guernsey and has also worked in Dubai and Hong Kong. She's the founder of the Women's Investment Network, a financial literacy program to inspire women to learn about money management and encourage them to save and invest. She's also a regular speaker, which we have worked together on a talk together, and events such as CBRE Women in Business. She's won several awards, which is fantastic. And she enjoys assisting startup founders with business advice and capital raising. So at the age of 62, she's studying a master's degree in executive coaching, and this is where we came together and I've been supporting her in the launch of that business. She shares her knowledge and expertise to help her clients to reach their full potential and achieve their personal and professional goals. So I hope that you find this episode useful. As I say, it's good to have an open mind about, yes, we are talking about cultures and how we can communicate across cultures, but at the end of the day, we're all humans. And so this is a human topic rather than a cultural one. Enjoy. Zoe, we are coming together today because we have some common experiences. Yes, we've worked together. However, one thing that we both have experience of, you much more than me, I might add, is that we have worked across different cultures and countries within different forms of the corporate world, right?
We have.
And with that, there is so much nuance and there's so much that we need to think about and we need to understand when it comes to behavior and communication. And that is what I'd love to tap into today, because I know that you have a whole wealth of knowledge in this area. Not only have I worked with you for a few months, but I've seen your writings on this. I've seen stuff that you've done that you share on LinkedIn, and you have a lot of stuff to say on this topic. And I think it's really important for anybody listening who's in a leadership role, who is responsible for working across different cultures, different countries, that you tune in and listen to this, because it's definitely going to be worth your while. And I'd like to start by thinking about the crucial things that we need to consider. And I guess the first place to start is communication preferences, right? Because we might be over here in Blighty communicating in the way that we do in British culture. However, if you start communicating with other cultures in that same way, it doesn't always hit right. So in your experience, and maybe you could share, a story of maybe where this started for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what you first noticed about communication preferences when you started to work within different countries.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Well, of course, nowadays we're working in a much more globally interconnected workplace, and really without the sort of barriers, if you like, the country barriers that we used to have. And so, really, we're all enjoying a great diversity of cultures and all the vibrancy and everything that brings to us. But as does as well, of course, bring its own set of challenges. And particularly for those in leadership roles, that's something that's really important to consider now, much more so than ever. Because, of course, culture can mean all sorts of different things, can't it? I mean, it can mean religion, language, customs, economic status, all sorts of things. So it's one sort of small word, but which covers quite a lot now.
That's true.
Also, I think, we're all accustomed to thinking that everyone is the same as us. And particularly when we haven't had the opportunity to work with other people or abroad before. But of course, really, we know that that's not true. And even within our own small social groups, there are different cultural or different nuances. And so really, it's a huge and fascinating topic. So thank you for inviting me to speak about it today. I guess that the first time I worked abroad was when I was just 22 and I went to Hong Kong. In those days, there was no internet and no mobile phones. So it was sort of more of more of an adventure, if you like, than it would be nowadays. I really enjoyed it. And I think that, actually as a young girl, I wasn't really that interested in joining the rather elite expat sort of groups. I really spent a lot of time with my colleagues. And of course, they were delighted that I was so interested in finding out about their culture. And it was brilliant for me because they invited me into their homes and to their real Chinese restaurants, which actually could backfire on me a couple of times because, of course, talking about culture, the food is a big difference as well.
It is.
And I was bought some duck's feet as a celebratory birthday treat once, and of course it's rude not to eat, particularly if it's a gift. And I also experienced fish heads and raw chicken. Oh my goodness! So not all of my cultural experiences were quite what I expected. But it's lovely, and you learn so much from it. And so, I think that was my first experience, really, of getting to know people from different cultures, and it was so rewarding, actually. Yeah, and I learned such a lot from it then, and I've always had an interest, of course. But coming back to the business world, of course, cultural communication is crucial now for business success, really. I mean, staff obviously coming from all sorts of different cultural backgrounds can lead to misunderstandings. We're not familiar, of course, with the language, cultural norms, values, customs, and all of these things. And I think with communication as well, we tend to think that it's all about verbal or written, but of course, body language is another big issue to consider. I mean, things such as obviously different perceptions, such as looking someone in the eye, even because in some cultures, such as ours, it would be seen as engaging and respectful and so on, whereas in other cultures, it would be seen as being quite impolite and even maybe sort of aggressive in a way. So that's, I think, a good example of almost an extremes of something as simple as looking someone in the eye. And so there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to take in. None of us want to offend anybody, do we?
No.
But it can be so easily done without having that knowledge. And as well, things like dress, the way we dress. Some cultures are much more formal than others, and particularly again in the workplace, this can cause challenges. People aren't dressed appropriately, whether that's more formal or less formal.
So what I'm hearing there as you're talking about your first experience there is really it's immersion, which is the best way to learn and understand about these differences in cultural preference in terms of communication. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I work with quite a few companies who are branching out into different countries, who are establishing, bigger practices in different countries or bigger offices or some completely new territory. And it's difficult when you're based in the UK and that you're leading on that type of operation. And so, therefore, in order to fully understand time spent within those environments, time spent with your people, immersing yourself in the culture of that
Yeah.
particular country is absolutely essential. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but it's really hard to do that if you're leading on something and
Yeah.
and other people are delivering that.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, it's a time thing as well, isn't it? I mean, particularly in the example that you mentioned there, if you're setting up a new office in a new country, the last thing you have to do is, have time to do is to go out to a restaurant and eat duck's feet, right? But
And
last thing,
yet, and yet,
yeah,
that probably does accelerate understanding because it's in those true human connections that we can learn and understand the nuance
yes,
of that type of behavior, particularly if we are leading on something where the employees within that country are taking calls or selling or operating with clients to do with the briefs that are set within UK culture and UK policy.
And again, we tend to think that people understand naturally because we're used to dealing with people in our culture and we know they will understand. So, one example of that actually, I've been working with a company in Abu Dhabi because, as you know, I spent some time in the Middle East. And the chief exec contacted me. She was concerned about a breach of contract by one of her staff members. And this really just involved confidentiality. So, and again, just an understanding of what confidential actually means. And of course, this could have actually a massive impact on her business if her staff aren't keeping client information confidential, of course. But the staff member concerned just, didn't understand really why it was a problem at all. And I can understand from her viewpoint that in her culture, she goes home and she discusses everything with her husband in detail. And although she signed the contract, of course, it doesn't matter, does it? Because, she didn't understand probably, and that's the thing. And I think that's the important thing is that we have standard contracts, of course, and that makes our life easy, but it can make our life more difficult if you don't ensure that someone fully understands the concept, of what they're doing. And of course, again, you've got a lot of people who are in a new industry for them as well. And so they've got so much to learn. And, this sort of thing doesn't happen by malice or anything like that. It's just a natural thing for somebody. I'm just using this as an example, to discuss what they've been doing during the day, but to a greater extent than they should. So that could be potentially damaging for her. And so it was helpful for her as well for me to come in as an independent person because it sort of took the confrontation out of it a little bit, which sort of, and of course, was less time consuming for her to deal with because I was dealing with it. But, so that's just one example. And I think it's the sort of thing that probably happens quite a lot because it's a simple word in a contract, but actually has a lot of meaning and potentially a lot of impact.
I don't want to jump to solutions too quick, but I think it's important in this point to think, well, what do we do then? When we are establishing these things, when we're teaching, training, whatever it might be, it almost feels like we've got to go 4 times as more detailed, 4 times as immersive in terms of transferring not only information and learning through this is the thing that you're selling or this is the thing that you are helping a client with to these are the nuts and bolts and details of the ins and outs of how we communicate, what we do say, what we don't say. And it's almost like a very detailed code of conduct, I'd imagine, that needs to be communicated explicitly, continuously.
Yeah. Well, and continuously is a good word as well, actually. And yes, we already have very big HR handbooks, but
Mm,
and this is, as you rightly say, sort of adding to it to a certain extent. It's one of the joys of our work life today. There are the positives, as with everything, but there are also really what you could see as the negatives in terms of it's more work. But I think you need to balance it out as well. Of course, I mean the huge positives of having a more diverse workplace will hopefully outweigh
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
the extra work on that side. But yeah, that's, I mean, there's so much work now, and rightly so, on diversity and inclusion and everything. And so this is really just a part of that. I think it just sort of falls in that slot, doesn't it?
Yeah. So tell us a bit more about your journey in the UAE or experience there and that part of your story.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions actually about the UAE. So I'm often asked questions about it. So I decided to move there. So 30 years after my Hong Kong experience, I moved to Dubai. I went on holiday to meet my son who'd been traveling and had an epiphany moment on the beach. I wasn't going at all with the intention of moving there. But by the time I was coming back from my holiday, I decided it was something that I definitely wanted to explore. And that was a fantastic time. I stayed there for 4 years, only left to come home to be with my son and his family. But I do still visit a lot. I really love it there. I think I was captured by the potential. You feel as if anything is possible, and it sort of is. It's actually a great place for women to live and work. It's very very safe, and I had the most enjoyable and fantastic learning experience,
Mm,
really. So, I mean, of course, it's a big melting pot, as they say, of so many different cultures from all around the world. And so you have the opportunity to spend time with people, yeah, from everywhere. And so I learned a lot. That's where I really learned about different cultures and so on. And it's really fascinating. And I learned a lot about different religions as well. And actually, because sometimes we confuse culture and religion, don't we? And and they are really two different things. Some things are cultural, and some things are more for religion. And we don't necessarily always know that. So that was useful learning, all sorts of useful learning for me. And I'm sure that I don't even know all the benefits that I've gained from it. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed all the learning that came from that.
and what sort of companies were you working with, and what sort of things were you focusing on when you were working in Dubai?
Yeah, so when I went, I'd been working in the investment sector for more than 30 years. So I had a long career, starting as one of the first women to work in the London Stock Exchange back in the 80s. So don't do the maths. And and I've worked in wealth management really ever since. So at the time, I was working with a global law firm as their in-house investment consultant. So luckily, actually, yes. So in this day and age now, with the internet and so on, I was able to say to them, I want to go and work in Dubai. And I suggested that instead of being their employee, they became my client. So we literally just switched it around, which worked perfectly. And of course, I could log on from Dubai as if I was sitting in the Guernsey office, which of course I wasn't. And but nobody would know. And so I was able to work from there as if as if there was no difference at all. And I also got a couple of other contracts to do some exploratory work. So, of course, this was great learning for me as well, because some of the finance companies here, particularly trust companies, were looking maybe to set up out there. So I did all the exploratory work and the research for them on whether it was feasible and what it would entail. So again, that was really great learning for me too. So yeah, I did that for the whole time that I was there. And I also set up something called the Women's Investment Network. For many years, and probably for obvious reasons, I've had women coming to me asking about money management, particularly those who've been divorced or unfortunately bereaved and really had no knowledge around the family's finances. So I was doing a lot of help with that. And so I offer some workshops on, on everything, on money management, whether it's from budgeting to debt management to what are stocks and shares and investing and saving and so on. So I set that up while I was there. I'm really using the branding now mostly to do events because I'm doing some work with female founders, which is something else that I started to do out there. So you can see actually that it was such a fantastic experience for me. I went with some contracts doing work that I've been doing for years. I learnt all sorts of new things, set up a new business as well. And so, yeah, I think I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't gone. So I'm obviously a big fan of stepping out of your comfort zone. It's definitely been the right thing for me to do.
And I know that's a big part of your story, being a woman in a very male-dominated industry when you were younger, and then striking out on your own, moving to a different country, establishing a life there, and all of these other things that you've learned. What would you say about how that's shaped your leadership style, the way that you communicate, the skills that you have that you now share with others? How has that multicultural influence, that spending time in different countries within different cultures, shaped you as a leader?
Yeah, well, I guess it does offer you, understanding, I think. I think you can be, I've always been told that I'm quite empathetic, so maybe that helped me with those sorts of, with the softer skills as well. But I think having that understanding, because even though we're talking about culture here, a lot of the issues, human issues, like conflict management, for example. And so when you're used to dealing with different cultures, that can sort of help you to manage, other challenges that might come up. And so I think it's important, actually, I think it's very important for leaders to have some sort of training, just around cultural issues. Because even if they are in the unusual position nowadays of not having a lot of different cultures in their firm, there's a lot of crossover anyway, between how you handle things like conflict management and even sort of performance measurement and, how people deal with, obviously that's performance management is always a very sensitive topic, isn't it, for everybody? But
well, let's dive into conflict management, because that's something that I, within my leadership development career, have done a lot of. When I was in-house as a leadership development consultant, I was often drafted in to deal with conflict resolution. And then now I deliver programs around it. And I like what you're saying here about the fact that, we're talking about human beings, right? But it is the nuances in understanding how people have different maps of the world. And so if we have that understanding, if we can enter into a potentially difficult conversation, an awkward situation, one that isn't harmonious, one that has got a few challenges around it, we can enter into those situations with an understanding or the ability to hold space and understand, then we can achieve the results that we want more effectively. And that's regardless of, as you say, regardless of where you come from, where you live, what your beliefs are.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. It's conflict, the skills of conflict resolution they transcend everything, right? But what are your thoughts on that in terms of your experience of dealing with conflict within the workplace?
I think it's really being able to better able, I should say, maybe to see both sides, because as they say, there's always two sides to a story. Well, usually, but not obviously in all cases. And so again, it's just such a human thing, and that everyone deals with everything differently. So the pressure and stress that comes with conflict, it influences how people respond to these challenging situations. And so navigating them together, does require actually a lot of sensitivity and awareness, and actually open-mindedness if possible. And I think that all of these skills just come from, the knowledge that you gain actually throughout your working life anyway, don't they? Because unfortunately, we all come across these sorts of situations that need to be navigated. But I think that I find that I can better mitigate anxiety and tension with all the knowledge that I've built up, because I tend to be quite good at seeing the different viewpoints. I mean, as actually, obviously sometimes it's hard to see someone's viewpoint if they're the aggressor, say, for example. That's a totally different situation. But being able to see and explain the different perspectives, I think, is so important, and trying to help people to imagine, the routes to the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that, my skills there have all accumulated through my work experience, much of which has been obviously at a senior level, including, non-exec director level in London and in the UAE. So I've dealt with people right up at the highest exec level as well, where things are still, they're still challenging.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also about understanding how we are in conflict, as well as knowing how to navigate it as a leader. It's what happens to us in a conflict situation, and how do we behave as a default. So that's some of the things that I train, and that can be down to background, upbringing, society, culture within society, religious beliefs. All of those things can inform how you respond to conflict. And for me, in my experience, I've come across two types of people, generally speaking: those that avoid,
Mm-hmm.
and those that fight.
Mm.
And obviously, goes back to our natural instincts of either doing nothing, of running away, or of facing the situation. And a lot of the people that I train and coach are in the avoidant bank of people, regardless actually of, there is definitely themes and patterns in the countries and places I have worked within the different cultures I've worked, but that sort of theme does come across, particularly at sort of the mid layers of management, and in some senior layers of management, and within the employee base, that conflict is not comfortable and is avoided.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense that I say everyone, we've just said, that not everyone wants to avoid it, but it sort of makes sense to me that people would want to avoid it. And I think sometimes people, though, they get dragged into it, though, don't they, whether they like it or not. And particularly if you are in some sort of leadership role, sometimes there's a sort of expectation to stand your ground and, have the upper hand and these sorts of things. And I think that's quite damaging for people who don't naturally have those attributes. They're forced into this sort of different personality to what they have, and of course that really just compounds the conflict as well. Then
couldn't agree more. I think there's a real misconception that in order to be more assertive, you have to be more aggressive. That in order to stand your ground, you have to speak louder. And if it's not a natural disposition, you can actually swing the other way. I have direct experience of doing that, of being someone who didn't speak up, who used to avoid, to being combative and swinging completely the other way, and then that having a bad effect as well. I think with leadership, it's about knowing that you can be assertive and stand your ground while still absolutely respecting and hearing the other person.
Exactly. And well, you're 100% right, of course, and that's the way to go. But again, going back to the cultural aspect, that's easier said than done as well, isn't it, sometimes?
It is.
Understand how the other person is dealing. I mean, then there's things like cultural let me get this word out, hierarchical. I'm not sure I even said it right, but where some people, even if they're a reasonably senior level, will feel very uncomfortable in any situation which is sort of maybe feel is slightly challenging their leader. So which is really unfortunate as well, because of course then this leads to more misunderstandings and so on. So I think the hierarchy thing is something that's really important to understand as well as a leader. How your staff individually feel about the level that they're at and the level that they're dealing with you at, and all of these things. As you say, I mean, we said at the beginning, it is a massive topic actually.
It is. I think with hierarchy, and there are still very much, again, culture around hierarchy. So it's like an ingrained be fearful of the most senior people do what they say, defer, and don't put your ideas forward. That's a sort of a trope that I see changing in matrix organizations or more flat structures. But in traditional companies, I work mainly within financial services that have been running for like hundreds of years, that it's ingrained, it's baked in that there's a hierarchy and that we do what the senior person says. However, there's much more move to shift those sorts of things in communicating, that everybody can put their ideas forward, that people can speak up. But still, as leaders, it's about encouraging that as much as possible and allowing for that within the communication line so that people do feel like they can do that.
And it's so important, you're absolutely right, again, for people to feel that they can speak up. And that's something, again, there's so many things to think about. But that's an important one as well. And time management is another thing, of course, that's an important thing to consider as well. And I think for me, as somebody who, honestly, I can't be late even if I try.
I'm the same.
Yeah. Even if I don't know where I'm going, I'll still get there on time. I don't even know how I've done it. And so moving somewhere like the UAE, where in actual fact, they have what they call a fluid calendar, was very challenging for me. That was probably the most challenging thing of all. And so even I tried to be late, but even if I was late, I'd probably still be the first person there.
Right.
And I was totally mystified as to how this could happen. But again, of course, in the workplace, it's a really important issue as well. Whether you're turning up for a meeting late. In some cultures, such as ours, I would suggest, that would be frowned upon. Whereas in other cultures, it's almost expected and nobody would really mind. But of course, you have to be very sure, whether you're expected to be on time or not. So obviously, because that can be a deal breaker as well sometimes.
Of course. See, for me, I can't understand how that can be productive. That if there's no sort of set boundaries around what we do within that time, what time is being spent doing what, if there's no boundaries around that, how is that managed and navigated? Is there a lead person in the meeting that's steering the ship, or how does that work?
I mean, to be honest, sometimes it doesn't work, frankly. And I know people who arranged a whole trip to a region and with maybe 3 or 4 meetings over a few days, big meetings, that they expect to last for a few hours. And, the prospective client hasn't turned up and don't really think anything of it and it's hard for us to get our head around. And of course, it's frustrating. But other cultures think that our obsession with the clock is hilarious.
Yeah.
So again, you sort of try and there's no way really of meeting in the middle there in a way. It is difficult. But it's, and of course, and again, in the workplace, again, some cultures, sort of Asia tend to have much more of a work to rule, sort of 9 to 5 or whatever, set times. And they're unlikely, I'm generalizing there, but to move outside of that. Whereas other cultures, will actually be more flexible or actually just expect you to work longer hours as well. And so this is something else, of course, to bear in mind, the expectations around time spent in the office. And I seem to be just listing lots of lots of things to consider, but it's true.
Well, I guess that's a good point to sort of move on to advice that you give for anyone listening. So anybody who might be embarking on this type of thing or gaining some experience in this area, is there any advice that you'd give?
Well, I think it's almost just going back to what we were saying before, in a way, to get involved, and I think the more you can spend time with, the local people, or even by reading. I mean, we're lucky. There's so much online, to be honest, to read about. But it's taking the time, really, and I think it'll really pay you enormous dividends just to find out about some of these things that we've been discussing today. Because, really, your business's success could really, it's not an exaggeration to say, could depend on it to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your enjoyment, depends on it as well, doesn't it?
It's also about respect as well, respect and understanding. So just as a recap there, the things that we talked about today are things like communication preferences, understanding conflict, having understanding around expectations in contracts and communicating that clearly, understanding your leadership style and how you can enter into situations by having more of an understanding of difference, time management and the differences there, which actually sounds like quite a big one, and performance management as well. And I've been lucky enough to work with you, Zoe, and I'd love for you to just explain, in terms of the context of what you're doing now, because you've done some fantastic things. And in terms of what you're focusing on now and what you're doing now, what did you get out of our time together?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Well, I think I was the lucky one, actually. And I still remember, I was lucky to find you. And I still remember saying to you at the end of our first or second session, I think, that I truly believed that was the most valuable hour I had spent for a very long time. And I really, well, obviously, I never say anything I don't mean. And yeah, it was brilliant. So I found you, of course, because I was... my one regret really was that I was asked to do a TEDx talk and I said no. And I've always kicked myself ever since. And so I decided at the beginning of the year, I don't normally make New Year's resolutions, but I was like, I'm going to do that. This is what I'm going to do this year, which is how I found you, because, of course, that's your specialism. And but you were so professional, actually, in the way that you steered me away from it. And you sort of said, right, well, you're setting up a new coaching business now where, of course, I'm using all of this knowledge and experience that I've gained. And it wasn't really the right time for me to launch into the TEDx talk. So I'm very grateful to you for pointing that out to me, because you were absolutely right. You gave me an awful lot of guidance. But I've always done everything myself, and I'm always like, and so it was fantastic to have you as a sort of sounding board, but giving me all of this advice. And you're still, in the nicest possible way, in my ear quite often when I'm drafting up something. And I think, now, how would Helen put it? So, and I still refer often to our notes. I know you kindly offered that we could record things, but I'm still a writing on paper girl. And so I still refer to our notes and so on. And it was really extraordinarily valuable, much more so even, to be honest. You exceeded my expectations.
So where are you? What have you done, and where are you at in terms of, tell us about the coaching business?
Yeah, so I've sort of, when I was studying, I started to do my degree last year, and I've now completed the practice and the theory. So I have a little bit of pro bono to do to complete the qualification. So I started coaching, had two people in the UAE. One was only by coincidence. It's a small world, sometimes. And she was finding it particularly useful for me to have worked out there, because I could understand her challenges so well. So that was fun. So, I'm sort of setting up the coaching business, doing some training mostly on the money management side. I also do some training on networking, because it's actually what I'm best known for by most of my friends and colleagues. Is, obviously, and this is another thing sort of just quickly to mention, of course, the enormous benefits of working abroad, building up such a huge network, which I really love. And so, yes, I'm sort of working on some courses and some programs and some training over the summer now, because, of course, most people will be going on holiday. So that gives me the opportunity to do that. And I'm trying out a few different ideas that have come my way to see whether they might be interesting. I'd like to do a little bit more speaking, as we know.
So we worked together on putting together a core story-based talk and a talk on resilience-focused talk as well.
Yes, exactly, because I have overcome quite a lot of challenges, and so I'm very keen, as I said before, for people to, step out of their comfort zone and get out there and reap all the benefits, of living our lives to the full. So, you were an enormous help. Thank you so much, Helen. And when I when I get to the next stage, I think I'll be back in touch for your help again once I've reached the right stage. But you gave me so much info to work on and everything, so I'm doing all of that now.
I think it's a good point for anyone listening. Like sometimes what you think is the important thing to focus on isn't. So you gave the example there of coming to me with the TEDx idea, but then needing to put foundational building blocks in place in terms of your brand identity, the problems you were solving for your clients, what audience you were looking at, what types of coaching packages were then going to be aligned, strategies in which to do that. And you're very good at those sorts of things anyway, but it's getting that clarity, I think, which is really important. And then that can inform, well, what do I talk about? What's my message? How am I delivering that message? What's the purpose of that? And so the ducks line up in that way. So thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of people will be able to resonate with that.
I hope so.
Yeah. So the final thought, which I ask my guests, is what words have changed your life for the better?
I think one thing springs immediately to mind, funnily enough, in terms of my professional life. About 20 years ago, a manager in my appraisal wrote that he wished Zoe didn't keep hiding her light under a bushel. I'm not really quite sure. I'll have to look up what that really means, I think, but where that funny phrase comes from. But it did spark. It's funny, isn't it, that it sparked something in me, in actual fact. I think I didn't realise I had a light that I was hiding under a bushel. And it sort of encouraged me to think, oh, if he thinks that, maybe, I should try and, get myself out there and promote myself a little bit more. Particularly as women, we're not usually very good at doing that. And I think that it just gave me a little push in the right direction. But in the end, maybe it was quite a big push. Mm-hmm. So because I still remember those words so after such a long time. So I'm sure that did have quite a big impact on me. So a little bit of encouragement sometimes can go a long way.
Yeah. And I think knowing your story of resilience, of working within a very male-dominated industry, taking steps forward, striving, being courageous, it sounds like you did. And you continue to do so, which is fantastic.
That's my intention.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zoe.
Thank you, Helen. Really lovely to see you again.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today as well.
You're welcome. And for anybody wanting to know more about Zoe or get in touch, all the information will be in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to Words That Change Lives. Please rate, review and follow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really means the world and helps me to reach more people so that we can all harness the power of our words and change lives for the better.